Fred Fishkin, thank you for being with us to watch or listen. We hope you're staying healthy. This event is made possible in part by support from the Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. Find out more at motoetf.com. We have a terrific lineup, starting with our provocateur, Michael Scrudato, Senior Vice President and Innovation Leader at Munich Re America, with responsibility for the future of mobility. Munich Re is a major provider of property and casualty insurance and reinsurance. Our panel of sharks includes the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. From Alianz, Jaques Amselem heads the newly created Internet of Things department and is also Director of Telematics. He's also spent many years working with the European Commission on regulatory issues surrounding connected and automated mobility. From the RAND Corporation, attorney and senior policy analyst Karlyn Stanley. Karlyn is principal author of RAND Report, Compensating the Injured, Evaluating the Impact of Autonomous Vehicles on Automobile Insurance, due to be released soon. Jane Lappin is co-chair of the Automated Vehicles Symposium and is recently retired from the Toyota Research Institute. And Jerry Lutin, retired transit planning director and professor, and currently principal investigator on a bus collision avoidance and automated braking project for the Washington State Insurance Pool. Our moderator is Compass Transportation and Technology President and founder, Dick Mudge. Dick?
Thank you, Fred. I'll waste no time. I'll turn it over to Mike to get started with a talk to get us all excited about this topic. And as long as you promise not to answer all the questions.
Well, thanks, Dick. And I will start with, insurance. Are we for or against smart driving cars? I think it's pretty clear that the insurance industry is for this technology. I mean, these safety benefits alone are worth it. And a lot of people ask me, well, won't insurance go away? What are you going to do? Why would we care? But at Munich Re, the future of mobility is one of the pillars of our innovation efforts in the U.S. and globally. And we believe that there's tremendous safety benefits in not only the ADAS technology that's available today, both being built into vehicles and on an aftermarket basis, but also with the adoption of level 4, level 5 vehicles. And while traditional auto insurance might evolve and change, we believe that as it evolves, as it changes, it creates new opportunities for new types of insurance products, risk management services. I see Jaques is starting to nod already.
Exactly.
Because what's happening is the liability, traditional auto liability, we think it will still be there. I mean, there will still be car crashes. But there are new types of liabilities that evolve. The more connected, the more autonomous vehicles become. You introduce liabilities such as cyber liability, products liability exposure. These are typically not risks that are covered in an auto policy. So we're working to evolve our products, evolve our services to keep up with that. And the exciting part about this is that these new areas of insurance, they will be smarter or more data-driven insurance products, that will give more insight, more transparency into the risks that we're covering. And we think that the pricing models will evolve to take that data that we're getting from a connected vehicle or quantifying the safety of some of the safety technology that's in an ADAS-enabled vehicle, or, building the right type of risk premium for an autonomous vehicle. Jaques, that's kind of the premise that I've seen at carriers here in the States and some of the work we're doing at Munich Re. How do you see it over from your side?
Same way exactly. I would say that of course automated and smart driving cars are a wonderful opportunity, and they promise to be very, very good from a safety point of view. Now we have to be patient as well, so we have to see, to learn, to understand, and to do that, data is going to be the key element. So we have to make sure that the data that those cars generate, and they generate a lot of data, is going to be made available, is going to be shared, so we can price those risks accordingly, fairly for the drivers. We will have time to discuss that this evening, but not all technologies are mature enough to guarantee a real reduction in claims and severity and frequency. So definitely the big topic now in Europe is about data. It's no longer whether, automation is going to bring some value. I mean, that's clear for everyone, but we have to nail it down to understand. And I think the entire automotive industry is also going into this direction. So we see, I think we've passed the first hype. Now we are in a more stable, more consolidation way to look at that, which is very good.
Yeah. No, and I think, that an important part of that data question and something that the insurance industry has a lot of is loss data. It's how can we take advantage of the loss data that we have to try to determine how many of these crashes are preventable. And one of the things that we've done is we've taken our loss data from many of our clients and through a tool we've developed called Loss Detect. And it's a text mining tool that reads the causes of loss, descriptions. And from that, we are trying to estimate which crashes are preventable versus not preventable through technology that exists today and potentially tomorrow. And what we have found is, we've evaluated over $5 billion of commercial fleet losses and found that over 2/3 of those are potentially preventable through ADAS technology that's available today. Forward collision warning, automated emergency braking, lane departure warning, even something as simple as a rear backup camera. And we're doing this not only to help quantify the safety benefits, but also help to show carriers, show insurance brokers, show fleets that there is an ROI for investing in this safety technology. And the key is just trying to find the right technology for the right vehicle. And I think that's another part of the challenge.
Yeah, but Michael, you're doing a great job in the commercial fleet, but what about in the personal fleet? I mean, the Gecko and the Flow, they're not out there saying, hey, go get the best car that has the best collision avoidance, automated collision avoidance system, and we'll really give you a discount. They're saying, hey, plug in this little thing so that we can see how you drive, and then based on how you drive, we're gonna go give it. When's the insurance industry really going to lead? I know you're leading in the commercial side. What about the stuff that we buy and we use?
Yeah, we've done it for retail.
Oh, Jaques, go ahead.
Jaques, no, I was just going to answer. I mean, we've done it for retail since many years, more than 10 years. Put this little box in your car, we'll collect information, and thanks to that, we can give you a discount. And we also give discounts up front.
But that's the box that tells me how I drive. It's not the box that's going to drive for me in case I misbehave. Because as we know, these aren't just crashes. They're misbehaviors by individuals. Okay, I tailgated somebody. I drove across a double line when there's a car coming my way, coming in the opposite direction. Those aren't human errors. They're misbehaviors. And so when are we going to put systems in, and you guys promote systems that are in fact going to go out there and really not let me do that?
Yeah, I think as Jaques said, a lot of it is getting the data to quantify those benefits. And while frequency has gone down with this technology, unfortunately what we've seen is its severity has gone up. The minor fender bender that used to be something that was likely within a policyholder's deductible, a couple $100, that's now a few $1,000s to repair because of the additional equipment there. So I think it's getting there. The more vehicles that are equipped with this technology, the more data that's available. One of the biggest challenges, I think, across the industry is knowing what technology is on what vehicle. It's not, unfortunately, it's not encoded into the VIN. And, and in most makes and models of cars, these technology packages are optional. So I think as you see it become more and more standardized and knowing where and when this technology is being used, I think that will accelerate the adoption of some of what you're talking about, Alan.
True, and to add on what you said, I mean, I think it's also a question of terminology and definition, not only whether there is an AEB, but which AEB, how it works, what its performance as well, because not all AEBs are the same, and that's a big issue we're facing when it comes to providing incentives. As Anna mentioned before, we have released a couple of products for testing in some markets, and we had, I would say, a rather small sample, so it was a few thousand vehicles. And we have not seen major difference on the claims. I would say on the combined ratio of those profiles that we have insured for the time being. So maybe we were not lucky, though those vehicles were different or whatever. But I think it's worth it. I mean, we really need to build up. One other aspect I wanted to mention, and then I stopped talking because I've been talking a lot, is that the data is critical, is absolutely mandatory to improve the systems as well for the design of the cars. I think that we're talking insurance here, but it's also a really critical aspect for the OEMs, for the equipment manufacturers to improve the technology, to make it better, which is really needed today.
Yeah.
So I have a question for Mike and Jaques about the on-ramp that you foresee as we move towards increasingly automated vehicles for levels 4 and 5. You'll need certain kinds of data in order to write insurance policies. You presume a certain kind of market, a certain kind of business model. You must have, at least I think you must have in mind, stages that you'll go through for different level 4, level 5 approaches, whether it's fleets, commercially owned fleets for mobility as a service, or privately owned vehicles where they flip a switch and they have level 4. What kinds of data will you need to support products to write policies for those different approaches?
So, Jaques, if you don't mind, I'll start. I think.
Of course not. Go ahead.
Go. So I think so traditionally, when you think of insurance telematics, let's talk about the black boxes or the apps that we're using. It's pretty standardized. What does the insurance industry look like? You're looking at acceleration, hard braking, hard cornering, speeding. If you're on an app, maybe you're looking at distracted driving. Some of that is relevant to a level 4, level 5 vehicle. But the more exciting aspect of it is, well, what else can you do beyond just that traditional telematics data? And some of what we're looking at, it's, what's the ODD? Where is the vehicle operating? And what is the riskiness of the environment that it is operating on? And where it's allowed to operate? That's one of the big, things that we're exploring at Munich Re. Jaques, anything?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say that all you mentioned, of course, are the important data points, but we also need trip data, contextual data, information about the cars, as was mentioned before in the previous exchange. It is absolutely critical to understand which technology is implemented in this car, which software update has been done recently, so we know also which software version was running in the car in case of accident. We need accident data. They are actually being regulated now in Europe. I think they are already part of the US regulation, but it's happening also in Europe, where we will know actually things such as when the car tries to hand over to the driver. So not so much on level 4 or 5, but on lower levels where there is this exchange of control between the car and the driver. We need to know exactly how the process worked. So whether the car asked the driver to pick it up, how many times, how long did the driver take to react, what happened after. Of course, collision information as detailed as possible. and potentially, some other, video footage and things like that. So at that point, we're getting quite close from whatever information will be required for product design and quality control. But actually, that's the same thing, because the more and more we're going to ensure the technology, not so much the driver and I would say the basic mechanics of the car.
Let me turn to Karlyn and first ask if you have any comments on all this, because you've been very active in the field. And I know you just finished a major study. If you can give us a quick summary of it, no PowerPoints allowed.
Well, sure. Well, first of all, it's interesting. Our discussion so far has hit on a lot of the key points and findings within our study. For example, of the importance of data. But we also touched on the importance of, or the likelihood that there will need to be cyber insurance. And we interviewed well over 35 people, OEMs, startups, consumer advocates, academics, insurance companies, federal and state regulators, fleet owners, so a wide variety of people. One of the interesting observations that the majority made was that they felt that the current insurance framework is flexible enough to adapt to the introduction of autonomous vehicles. However, once we reach maybe a level 4 or 5, the groups of people we spoke with thought that there might be a need to adapt the framework more significantly. And interestingly, we talked also to regulators and insurers in the UK, Canada, Australia, and Japan, and found out how they were trying to adapt their insurance frameworks. And to your point, Michael, in the UK, Japan, and Canada, they are all exploring methods of data sharing.
Sure.
Manufacturers and insurers and other stakeholders. So these are issues that seem to be very cross-cutting. So I'll leave it at that for the moment, but happy to tell you more about the report.
So if I'm a fleet owner and somehow I've developed a system and I've defined an operational design domain in which I want to put service out there without a driver and really provide mobility as a service with this, which is level 4. It'll never be level 5 because that assumes everywhere, and that's never going to happen. But forget, within my operational design domain, what do I have to do to prove to insurance entities to give me some coverage, or do I have to self-insure? Where do you think it's going to go? Michael, any of you?
Yeah, I don't think you'll need to self-insure. I mean, we insure companies today that are testing this technology, and in some cases, operating, in a very narrow use cases in level 4.
Yeah, but what am I going to have to? What would a company have to show you such that you? I know you can come up with a number, but the number may be whatever, a reasonable number. I mean, what do you think they're going to have to show? Forget what they need to show the government. What are they going to have to show to the real people who are going to have to provide really the wherewithal to go out there and put a service out there that provides the mobility that these systems are supposed to provide?
Well, I think what they need to show to their insurance company, and now this is my opinion here.
Yeah, sure, of course. That's exactly what we want.
More importantly, it's my opinion and not that of Munich Re.
Yeah, okay, great.
But what they need to show to their insurance company is likely less than they will need to show to other stakeholders in this ecosystem, because insurance is not a promise that nothing will go wrong. If that were the case, there would be no car crashes and there would be no house fires. I mean, so insurance is a promise to pay when something will go wrong. So what we're trying to do is determine, how do we calculate a premium that covers the losses and our expenses and allows the industry to make a little bit of profit, which in auto insurance over the past decade, it has not done. So, what we're trying to do is get enough transparency that we can charge a risk adequate premium. We're not trying to say, okay, your vehicles will never ever crash. I think there's other stakeholders out there that probably have a much higher bar than the insurance industry.
Jaques?
Yeah, if I may just step in. Well, when it comes to what we've done in Alianz, actually, we have been going quite far in the collaboration with those companies who were looking for insurance coverage on those kind of vehicles, and we have insured a few of them. So what we've done is that we have spoken with them. We have done, I mean, it wasn't as far as audits, but we have been working with them on, asking questions. How did you test your product? Do you insure this? How do you control the speed? How do you control this parameter, that parameter? I mean, that's why insurers also need people like me and Michael to know about it, because otherwise then it would be insuring with being blind, so that's not what we want. We want to know about the risk, and best ways to understand the technology as well, and is to speak with the producer. We have constant relationship with the OEMs. I mean, in Munich, we have a test lab where we crash cars all year long, and this is what we do. We work together with the OEMs to understand how their technology behaves, how performing it is, and the consequence of that is a potential discount or a better rating for those vehicles who have proven to be more efficient, safer, and better than the others.
Do you perceive that you'll have a disengagement rate in the operational design domain that you have to get better than and demonstrate that with an attendant on board? And once you do that, hey, you can go and take the attendant out. Is that the kind of thing that you think? I mean, or is that too pragmatic or too simplistic? Or go ahead.
I don't think I don't know if disengagement rate is the right.
Well, I threw that out there because that should generate a bunch of comments, whatever. But go ahead.
That's not the parameter. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think just to build on what Jaques said, I think there's in these early days as it evolves, there's got to be some collaboration between the insurance carrier and the insured. I think it's dangerous to just put out capacity and not have that type of collaborative relationship between the companies that you're insuring as they're making their way through this process.
Is there any role for the government in any of this? Or is this something that's best to have the government stay out of?
Of course. I mean, in Europe, actually in France, the government came up, I mean, it's still not passed, but they came up with a proposal for certification of those level 4 and 5s, and the certification involves all kinds of testing and validation and things like that. And it's going to be likely the same thing at EU level.
Right, and in the UK, there's definitely going to be a list. I don't know that it's been operationalized yet, but there's going to be a listing of all vehicles that are functioning at the level 4 or 5.
Yeah, and I look at the news from last week. USDOT came out with their AV test, framework. Kudos to them for doing it. I mean, it's great to see that step being taken.
Yeah, we need that. We need that definitely.
But is that just so you have something to point to? It's their fault if something goes wrong. They said we were going to be okay. I know you can't answer that. Never mind.
So I want to bring us back further into the future, Mike and Jaques, where we're looking at mobility as a service, where the vehicle has a defined ODD and takes members of the public together, strangers, in a closed vehicle from point A to point B. Does that introduce new kinds of liabilities, new opportunities for you to write particular policies to the fleet owner, for the individuals? How does that work?
Excellent question. Mike, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, well, look, what that's doing, it's building upon, it's the way we insure, Uber and Lyft today, which is a derivative of how you insured a taxi company in the past, and this is the next step in that. So really the way Uber and Lyft, we're insuring the platform, and that platform provides, the insurance to the drivers while they're on it. And when you remove the driver, there is still that platform. That my hypothesis would be that platform will still need to purchase insurance to cover the liabilities of its operations. Now, once you remove the driver, okay, it's probably more than just auto liability. As I said earlier, there's probably a combination of, products liability exposure there, cyber liability exposure there.
Criminal liability.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
It's so it's so I think it's an evolution. Most of the exposures that we're talking about and the coverages that you need are just, they exist today. It's just you're putting them together differently.
And if you just building up on that and to further answer your question, Jane, we came up also with riders insurance. We've done that. We just released one for electric scooters in Europe and in some other places as well. And what this is about an insurance to cover whatever risks that come on top of the liability of the company who rents you the scooter. And that would be the same thing for the riders of shared vehicles, shared cars, or automated cars. We provide insurance, for example, and it's kind of, it's between insurance and assistance, actually. Alianz is also a major assistance provider, one of the largest in the world. And the assistance consists is on providing the insurance that you will reach your destination. So in case the car breaks down, in case the driver or the car has an accident or something, we can dispatch you another vehicle to take you to where you want to be. We can insure your luggage in case you lose them or they get stolen in the shared car. We can provide, we'd say all kinds of services as well that come on top. The interesting bit of that concept is that insurance will not be only on the car or the company who provides the service, but part of the insurance cost will also be borne by the rider, which can also make the insurance more affordable for the company who provides the service. So yes, there is an evolution in the coverage.
And do we, as consumers, estimate that we spend sufficient amounts of time as riders to merit buying a policy, or is it presented to us in the moment that we mount the vehicle and we accept it or we don't accept it ride by ride?
It is part of the rides rate. So it's like when you buy a TV, for example, there is a product liability involved with that TV. Now the product liability is paid by the manufacturer of the TV. You don't see any of that. You don't have a special insurance that you have to sign off when you buy the TV, but it is there. So the company who designs the products and manufactures the products and brings it to you has to have that product liability coverage. Exactly the same thing happens for the cars. Now the difference is that as a rider, you need to have an additional coverage because the risks linked to the way you will use the car may be different because of what we said before. You're taking a shared vehicle because you want to go fast to a specific place at the airport because you need to catch your plane. If for any reason the car breaks down or whatever happens, you need to have another car that comes and picks you up to take you there very quickly.
Yeah, and Jane, just you talked about the turning on, turning off insurance, and I saw something pop into the Q&A just as you asked the question. Someone else asking about that, but it's right now I think there are some insurtech startups working on it. It's a new trend, but I think it's still too early to tell whether this really takes off. Speaking as a consumer of insurance, how many people out there really like to think about their insurance? I don't think many people do.
Right.
All the time.
Right. Yeah. And if I have to sign a risk waiver or buy insurance each time I hop on a scooter, it's an interesting.
Right.
No.
Yeah. That's not necessarily an insurance question. It's more of a consumer behavior question or consumer journey question. What's more appealing to the consumer? as an insurance consumer, look, I don't want to have to think about, do I turn my insurance on or off? I just want to know, if something bad happens, my policy is, I'm going to be covered.
Michael, I've got a question for you. What about bundling? One of the things we heard in talking to the people we interviewed was that potentially insurance could be bundled in the sale of new AVs. And this would be particularly for individual consumers. The idea being that this would create a greater confidence in the consumer, that the autonomous vehicle was being backed by insurance coverage, et cetera. So this would be a positive thing for the sale of autonomous vehicles. What do you think about that?
I think that's not unique to autonomous vehicles. I think you're seeing a lot of automakers explore this concept of bundling or embedding insurance with the vehicle, whether it's a purchase or whether it's a subscription. That you're going to pay X dollars a month, you get access to a Cadillac or a Volvo, or pick your vehicle, and insurance comes with it and maintenance comes with it. So that's a trend that I'd say you're seeing the OEMs, I'd call it experiment with, because I've seen some programs start and stop and restart. I don't think they've quite figured that out, but certainly it's the idea of embedding insurance with the vehicle. It's a trend that we're monitoring pretty closely, and again, not unique to just autonomous vehicles.
Well, Tesla may go there because they think that their vehicles are a heck of a lot safer, and the expected liability associated with them is a lot more than what your actuaries have figured out, and they might think that, hell, might as well bundle it and make some money off of it, blah, 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 right?
And because they have the data, Alain, that
they have the data. They have the data. I mean, absolutely, and they have whatever data, and they should know. Okay.
Exactly. But just to build up on Michael's answer to Karlyn, I don't think having an insurance is a promise that everything will go well. Having an insurance is a promise that in case things go wrong, you will be materially compensated. And this needs to be very clear. It's not because a car is insured that it's not going to have a crash. And it's not because it's insured that it is good technology and then the development has been done properly. Insurance is business like another one. And if you come to me, I price your risk, as was mentioned before. I evaluate the risk. I tell you, this is how much you need to pay me to cover your risk, period. I understand that from a consumer point of view, it may add value if it's well packaged and marketed, as Elon does very well. He says, I'm so sure that my car, he makes the correlation himself. Exactly. But it is not, it is self-certification. Nobody has been able, no third party has been able to test and challenge that statement. And I think this is what we're missing in the industry today. Hopefully it will change.
We're starting to get some people from the audience. I want to bring them on. But first, Jerry, you should talk about the project you're doing. This is...
Sure. Thank you. Well, I've been working in the transit industry for about 40 years. People love to sue us. And we don't.
That's true. Oh, yeah.
The bus industry gets about 6,000 crashes a year. We have about 100 fatalities and about 16,000 injuries. And for the last year, we have data available. The casualty and liability expense for the transit bus industry was $671 million. Now, that may not be much compared to the private auto insurance company, but it's a lot for us, especially because we don't make any money.
Sure.
I've been working with the Washington State Transit Insurance Pool in the state of Washington. They insure 25 different transit agencies, and they began looking at this as a loss prevention kind of a study. And we started out looking at collision avoidance technology, and now we're going into the next stage, and we've got federal support from the Department of Transportation to look at automated emergency braking. And for us, the data is pretty available. We were able to go and look through claims. I think Michael had talked about that. know I looked and a team of a couple other guys. We looked through about $53 million worth of claims, and we figured that 35% could be prevented with forward collision avoidance, and another 30% could be avoided in terms of pedestrian detection. And that, coupled with the fact that we're talking about 70, 80,000 vehicles out there, not in just Washington, but nationwide. So we're talking about casualty and liability expenses per bus on the order of $6,000 to $7,000 per year. And you got to keep a bus for 12 years. So that's a lot you're paying out over the life of the vehicle. And so we can use that as a benchmark in order to look at the technology. And we found that we were getting some pretty good results just with warning drivers. Although a lot of the drivers didn't like it, it did change their performance. Now we're going into the next phase, which is actually looking at automated emergency braking. And there was some discussion earlier about the role of the government. And it would have been very helpful for us had the government stepped in, first of all, with more funding. Obviously, we did get some, but also with standards, because we're kind of making things up as we go along. And we're getting to a point where we now are going to be faced with how safe is safe enough, and how do we make go, no-go decisions on just testing with live passengers. Our problems are somewhat different from others because other passengers in cars are belted in. We have passengers who are standing up. We have all ages. We have a lot of different situations, and we're operating in urban traffic. So there's a lot of promise for the technology. On the personal side, in 2018, I decided to get rid of my old cars and get new cars with as many features as I could. And I love it. You know, it makes up for a lot of my deficiencies. I will say.
Okay. I'm going to try to get some people from the audience on. Roger Longtote is active in this field, and I'm sure has questions. I've seen questions going along on the chat box. He just disappeared. Oh, there he is. He's back again.
Wow.
Roger, did you want to ask a question of somebody?
Sure.
or ask a question of everybody?
Hi, Jaques. Good to see you.
Hey, Roger. Good to see you again.
It's been too long. Is that a COVID beard, or have you had it for longer than that?
Well, it's a COVID one. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so I have a whole bunch of questions. Some of them were in the chat already, but one that comes to my mind is every time someone driving a Tesla vehicle has a mishap, it seems like good old Elon has perfect access to the information, which he invariably uses against the driver of the vehicle, but it doesn't seem like the driver has access to that same data or video. So how about some standards around access to your own vehicle data and video?
So true.
Yeah.
So true.
Also,
so true.
I'm curious whether one of my little beefs isn't on the full AV side of things. It's more on the ADAS side of things, and that is insurance companies in the US almost universally, not quite, but almost, are not as advanced as European insurers from the standpoint of providing discounts for vehicles that have automatic emergency braking, blind spot detection, lane departure warning, or lane keeping technology. I think we'd have better equipped cars here in the US if the insurance industry was a little bit more proactive. What is Alianz doing anything in this area?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. I mentioned it briefly before. So to answer your first point, Roger, that is part of the big discussions we're having with the European regulators to make sure that the individual is actually in control of his data and is the first one to decide which data goes where and for which purpose. So the first thing that should happen is that when you buy a smart car with whatever kind of connectivity and features, you should be told as a owner what this car generates in terms of data and where it goes and for which purpose. And that's the first step. And you can decide whether you want this to happen or not. First point. Second point is that you as an individual should be able to access that data. That's part of the GDPR regulation, so the General Data Protection Regulation, that you can claim your data to what is called the data processor at any point in time, and it cannot refuse to give you that information. So I think the example you gave with Tesla is unfortunate. I'm very, I would say, pissed and sorry every time I hear about that, because I think that's not fair. As simple as that. I mean, if the driver was not driving the car, there would be no data. Period. So he is the one who or she, sorry, is the one who generates that information. So he should be. I mean, it doesn't mean that he should have access to tons and tons of information. 4 terabytes or whatever the car produces every day. It doesn't mean it has to happen all the time. But in case he wants to, he should be able to do that. I think that's absolutely critical.
Discounts for ADAS.
Yeah, and discounts for ADAS, we've done it. I mentioned that before. We've done it in a few countries. I mean, we have it in Germany since many years. We've developed together with Volkswagen a product that provides discount insurance for ESP. We have in France experimented with a small, I would say, small amount of customers, a possible discount. It was actually 25% discount on the insurance policy.
Are regulators helping, or are these insurance commissioners being a problem?
No, that regulators are not stepping into that. It's a decision of the company, of each company. It may happen later on, but it's not the case now.
Yeah, and I think the regulators, they want to see data supporting any type of rates that you're following. And in the U.S., you've got 50 different regulators that you need to provide that data to.
Yeah, well, I think talking about the regulators and the government is interesting. Jerry talked about the need for government to set safety standards. Now you're talking about regulators. Karlyn, in your study, did that come up at all? That there should be a role for government for defining safety or setting regulations to help?
Definitely. And actually, going back to the data issue, we were very interested in finding out what was going on. So federal regulators and what might be in the near future a framework for sharing that kind of data. And what we learned was that, hey, Ellen, we learned that the DOT is basically monitoring the situation, hoping that industry can determine a way forward. But I think that they're keeping a careful eye on how industry may work out the sharing between OEMs and insurance stakeholders, and probably will try to find a way to step in, but does not want to.
Well, the DOT has been funding research on UBI because they find that anybody who participates in UBI program drives less, drives in a safer fashion, and so you get less traffic, less congestion, less emissions. For studies, anyway, they're fostering studies of this.
Yes.
Before we turn to Ellen to ask a question, I have to admit I'm very worried about Alan, because this is the quietest you've ever been on one of these sessions. So are you okay? Should we call 911?
No, I have too many comments. I think to champion to give a little bit of help to the insurance industry. I like to say that the insurance industry has been burned in the past with safety, because the past definition of safety was crash mitigation, and associated with great improvements in crash mitigation, which made people not lose their lives in cars. It cost the insurance industry an enormous amount. Because the airbags went off, and all this stuff got broken, and the crush zones got crumpled, and you had to throw away the car and so on and so forth. But the person lived.
Are you going to make us feel sorry for the insurance industry?
No, absolutely. So they were burned tremendously. And as we all know, what we can't say that, in fact, if you live, never mind, I won't say it. Everybody knows what it is. So I don't need to say it. And so therefore, it of course has to come a little bit timid as to whether or not this ADAS stuff really works. All to find out that the ADAS stuff doesn't, disregards objects that are stationary in the lane ahead and assumes that you can pass underneath them. And
but
who
I know where you're
code
headed
that did
next.
that?
I know where you're headed next.
And
How expensive it is. How
How
expensive it is to repair those systems. I know that's coming next.
Absolutely. So so of course the insurance industry has been a little bit afraid of this. But the key of all this, at least what keeps me pumped up on it, is it's focused on avoiding the crash in the first place.
Yeah.
So you don't have any crumpled stuff. You don't have an airbag exploded. You don't have an ambulance chaser. You don't have a lawyer. You don't have an emergency hospital, whatever. And that's the key. And the key to do that is somebody has to sit over the misbehaving driver and say, hey, you can't do that. And you can't tailgate. You can't excessively speed. You can't, what do you mean? I mean, that's why I bought that. But it's supposed to be a privilege, not a right, and whatever. And we haven't gone there, and we have to get there as a society to cut this misbehavior that's happened on the roadways and the road rage that takes place. Never mind. So that's all I need to say. I'm going to shut up now. Let the other people talk.
Yeah, I just brought Ellen on. And Ellen, I know, has some active thoughts about this. And do you want to butt in before Ellen gets going again? With any comments or questions, Ellen?
Well, one is just really looking at this in the broad spectrum of how do we want to assign responsibility, and we encourage the automakers who have, the best ways to ensure as safe as possible.
Right.
So how do we structure insurance so that we don't take away those incentives for the automakers to make it as safe as possible, so that you reduce the amount of misbehaving? I mean, we try to blame the victims a lot, but a lot of it is the way that the roads are structured, that the vehicles are structured. So I think that we want to put as much responsibility on the makers as we can. How do we do that?
I assume the insurance companies talked?
I didn't hear part of that. That was
do the insurance companies leverage the OEMs?
Yeah, is the responsibility going to shift from the driver to the car manufacturer? And most likely it's going to happen somehow because of the technology that needs to be insured. So I think whoever manufactures the car, and that's a long story because it's not only the car manufacturers. Car manufacturers tend to be more assemblers than real manufacturers and designers of the entire car. I mean, there's going to be an interesting liability chain discussion here around that. But the idea is that it's true that if the car does a mistake, with the technology in the car does a mistake, then it's no longer the driver who's responsible. And that's why I mentioned before that we need to have access to that information in case of an accident, who was driving at that point in time.
Jaques, I think what you've just described, it's very similar to the way auto insurance works today.
Yeah,
in that, if there is an issue with the technology in the car, if the braking system fails, the transmission system fails, and there's a process called subrogation where the insurance company will the insurance framework is set up, the claim is settled, and the policyholder is made whole. And then, however, behind the scenes, the insurance carrier then goes after the OEM. So that process of subrogation exists.
It does.
Today.
It does, Mike. But the issue is that in most cases, it is much easier to say it's a driver's mistake than do a deep investigation to figure out whether the car had a failure or not. Because when you have an accident, it may very well be that you've tried to brake, but the brakes were not efficient as they should be. And that could be a design problem, that could be a maintenance problem. So we tend to say, you know, I'm back to these 95% or 94% accidents due to human mistakes, which is, I'm sure that in those 95%, there is a bunch of them which are technology or mechanical or design mistakes that we have not been investigating just because the system works in that way.
Mm-hmm. But what the insurance industry hasn't done to try to get the OEMs to do a better job is they haven't gone out there, and the Gecko and Flow haven't gone out there and says, we've determined that darn it, the Subarus really work, and the stuff on eyesight on Subaru really works. And Jane, if you happen to have a 16-year-old kid who's going to drive, you should go out and buy that kid that car, because not only are we going to give you a discount on that, we're going to save that kid's life. They haven't done that. They haven't gone out there and really led to get OEMs to put vehicles out there that are going to save teenagers' lives.
Well, I think just to IIHS, which is funded by the insurance industry, they do, the crash safety rating, they're factoring ADAS into the work they're doing now. I know their study they published recently was not the most popular, and we could probably have a separate debate on that.
Yeah.
But that aside, I mean, a lot of the work that they've done is to measure the effectiveness of this technology. And again, that's all funded by the insurance industry. Yeah. So, Alan, you say that we're not doing anything to help promote, it's
we have one in house.
Didn't say you didn't do anything. I just want you to do more.
Back to Ellen's point, she asked, how can we see that manufacturers are, improving the product and making automobiles safer, no matter whether they're using ADAS or to full autonomy. And we asked the people that we interviewed about different models of insurance, and we asked them about the status quo. We asked them about, well, what about no fault?
Yeah.
Interestingly, the majority of people we interviewed said that there were many problems with no fault that are well known. One of the key concerns was that it would relieve manufacturers of the need to do better, to improve the product. And so we thought that was certainly a key concern. So Ellen, that's, back to your point.
Yes, there was a brief period of time in the 1980s when pollution insurance was outlawed in some states, because the idea was that if you had pollution insurance, then you would pollute. That was quickly done away with. But I think that it really is figuring out how do we structure insurance so that it covers losses and at the same time encourages safety. And I think that there's ways of tinkering it and bundling it that could be done better. That the private insurance market could do that better than the government in some respects.
Jane, it looks like you're about to say something.
I wasn't. Sorry to be misleading, Dick.
Hey, Dick, can we there's a few questions in the chat about cyber. And I know we've got 6 minutes left or so, but can we spend a few minutes on that? Because I think that's
absolutely no. That's right. You can't stay for the next half hour.
Yeah,
it's a brand new insurance. How does that handled?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, so if you look back on, just cyber insurance overall, I mean, 20, 25 years ago, there was no such thing of cyber insurance for businesses. It's now depending on the analyst report you read, it's a $5 to $10 to $20 billion market, that's grown up, in the past generation. So
it's now the highest risk, the biggest risk for insurance companies.
Yeah, Jacques, with your IoT hat on,
Exactly. Cyber became the first risk, the biggest risk for insurance companies. Absolutely.
And some of the questions I've seen in the chat here asking, okay, look, as and it's not just as you move into level 4, level 5 autonomous vehicles, but really it's any type of connected vehicle. If you're connecting a vehicle, that thing becomes a computer on wheels, and the cyber exposure grows within that vehicle. And I think one thing that the industry is starting to look at is, how do we handle that? And what are the risks there that are covered by an existing policy, and with what we would call silent cyber, where we're covering it already, versus where are there new types of exposures that are not covered? And
let me ask, has there ever been a cyber claim, or is this all in the future?
No, there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot of them. There's cyber insurance policies and there's cyber claims, a lot of them. But maybe to make the link with the topic that we were discussing, about automation and so forth, not only cyber, I would say, but part of the design of the software of the car and all the, I would not say the electronics because it's hardware, it's a different story, but software, AI, whatever you implement, also needs to have its own insurance coverage. And that's not the OEM's responsibility because that's not the OEM's design. This is the design of the providers of the OEM. So theoretically, the provider of the OEM should have his liability insurance in case he produces a bad design. And the OEM has also his own insurance in case he produces a bad product. So, and this is what builds the link. Now, when it comes to cyber, at least in Europe, if I may add at this point, is in Europe we are, and I think it's also valid for the rest of the world because it's a UN discussion. There's a cybersecurity framework that is being built and that is being shared. So it doesn't tell exactly which, I would say, technology or which thing you need to implement in your vehicle, but definitely it provides a framework to ensure that when you design your vehicle, you have made sure that you have looked at all the possible vulnerabilities, all the threats, that you have ways to mitigate them, that you have ways to detect them, and so on and so forth. And that's a very, I would say, complex topic. It's another meeting in itself. I would say cyber insurance because of all the possibilities that you have around that. But indeed, because a car is connected, you open another area of attack, and this area of attack can become a problem, especially if hackers decide to attack an entire fleet of vehicles. That can be a disaster, that can be something very bad. So we have to make sure those things don't happen.
So let me jump in near the end here. We have another 2 or 3 minutes to go before our hour's over. We will stay on afterwards and keep trying to address questions. I know Michael has to leave and probably Karlyn as well. So I was going to say, do you guys have any last minute comments or questions before we switch to the extra half hour when you guys are gone?
Yeah, I would just like to say that in response to what Jaques just described, interestingly, at the Autonomous Vehicles Symposium, of which Jane is a co-chair, our legal committee is going to be presenting a mock trial remotely of the very scenario of an attack on an autonomous vehicle fleet. It's at some time in the near future. And it will be a trial to see who is going to be compensated for all of the damage from havoc after this cyber attack. So join us.
Yeah, with pleasure.
Yeah. Stay tuned. Thanks for mentioning that, Karlyn. It's important to know about these opportunities at the Automated Vehicles Symposium. I have a question for Jaques and Mike. It's important to see the role that insurance plays in the future of highly automated vehicles. My question to you is a closing question. How can insurance participate in a way that helps to accelerate the introduction of highly automated vehicles into the public domain?
Mike, you go first.
Yeah,
to go before.
I would say, going back, I think it was 5 years ago at the Automated Vehicles Symposium. All the rage was insurance is a barrier toward the adoption of autonomous vehicles. And I think the next year I gave a talk on why insurance is not a barrier to autonomous vehicles, because we created a policy, as have other carriers. And it's something that, Jane, I don't think there is one magic barrier that's sitting there toward the adoption of highly automated vehicles that the insurance industry is standing in the way of. I think our coverages will continue to evolve as the technology and as the business models evolve. I look at some of what we were covering 4 years ago compared to what we're doing now, and I don't think it's necessarily an insurance coverage issue. I don't think it's necessarily even a limits or a capacity issue. I think what you're going to see over time is that the policies will evolve, but then so will some of the risk management services, that complement the policy will evolve there. As Jaques said, there's got to be some collaboration and cooperation between the carrier and the insured, and very similar to the way you insure in a large property or an expensive object, there's a risk inspection, there's loss control services and things like that built around the policy. I think that's what you're going to see continue to happen around autonomous vehicles. And at Munich Re, we're hoping and working to help accelerate that process.
Michael, I don't think you're going far enough. I think, Michael, I absolutely
agree.
I absolutely need you to stand by me when I talk to the folks in the neighborhoods of Trenton and in city council and with the mayor, saying that there is a legitimate insurer who will, in case some, as we've all said, we're not going to stop crashes. They're going to things are going to happen. It's going to stand by and make people whole.
Alan, I've been I've been in Trenton with you. Come on.
I know, and you are, and I'm saying you're absolutely critical. You're absolutely critical to having a welcoming environment for this technology, so it can provide the good that it's supposed to provide. Absolutely critical.
Look, on that note, Alan, look, I'll go to Trenton with you anytime. We'll put our masks on. We'll go down there and we'll talk. But look, I apologize. I didn't realize we were going to go over the hour, and I do have an.
Yeah.
But thank you.
We officially ended 1 hour, but we'll all be here afterwards. Thank you.
All right.
So Jaques, my question stands
we
for you.
have to break right now. We'll come back.
Absolutely.
So stay tuned. This has been Insurance for or Against Smart Driving Cars. Thank you to our panel for a very informative discussion, to say the least. Our series of debates and discussions will continue in the coming weeks. We welcome your thoughts about topics and participants. You can find us at zoom-tank.com and at smartdrivingcar.com. The Automated Vehicles Symposium is still slated for the end of July. It will be a virtual conference. The info is at automatedvehiclessymposium.org. Thank you for taking part, for watching, listening, and we hope you stay healthy and safe. Now, for those of you who would like, you're welcome to stay online to continue the discussion. Dick?
Yeah, we'll keep going for another half an hour. There's a lot more questions that the people have. I know Jerry Spears and Mitch Erickson have been quietly waiting to ask questions.
I had to finish answering as well, Dick.
Yeah,
okay,
Jaques, Jaques, particularly for you in Europe, where I can see that Framework 2020 from the European Commission supports some really excellent trials. And I have to expect that you're a partner and or in some way in there assessing risks as they become known. There are new risks that are discovered in these programs. And so my question to you is, what are some of the surprises? What are some of the confirmation that you've learned from your involvement in these public-private investment tests?
Yeah, well, one thing that is true, and just to add up on what Michael said before, what Alain said as well, I think it is important also that insurers get involved in the research and development phase, not only once the product is designed, but also in the development phase, because we have, I mean, we're not going to tell the OEMs what they need to do. Come on, that's not our business. But we can add value to that process. We can help them mitigating the risk. And if, again, I mean, I think I've been taught, especially in Alianz, that challenging is healthy, and we need to be able to challenge the OEMs on some of the things. So when they put a new system on the market, we have to be there, or when they intend to develop a new system, we have to be involved in the process and help them designing a better product. And this goes with transparency. This goes with accessing data as well. The issue, though, and especially with automated driving, is that there has been so much money put on that. The topic has been so critical, so strategic for so many companies that they have been hiding and keeping that data and the information for them. They didn't want to share it because it is critical for their business. It is strategic. So I think it's a bit of an issue that we need to address here and make people understand as well that, you know, it's not because they will share information that all their competitive advantage will disappear. I mean, they still have many aspects to work on. And the advantage of sharing and opening up is that they will benefit from others' inputs as well.
Jaques, have you learned anything in particular that you would repeat to the audience that was of surprise to you from any of the European pilots with, you know, research vehicles?
Well, one thing I actually, the point that remains in my mind is one thing that came up last year, actually, in Princeton at the SDC, where there was that gentleman from GM that was explaining the details of how the AEB works in GM. And he explained us that, you know, after a certain speed in certain conditions, the AEB doesn't work any longer. So the AEB is not able, can't remember exactly, don't sorry, don't quote me on that, but I think it was a limit of, you know, 60 miles per hour. After 60 miles, the AEB is not efficient any longer. And those are things that the drivers need to know in the first place. So you hand up a car to a driver, a customer, and you tell him, your car will brake automatically in case there is an obstacle. Oh, but if it's 60 kilometers per hour, it won't brake. If it's raining, it won't brake. If it's snowing, it won't brake, and so on and so forth. So these things are absolutely critical. I think we've forgotten to talk about the users, the drivers until now. And I think that those are a super important parameter, because if you know how to use your vehicle, and if you know the limitations, then you won't have the bad surprises that we have seen and we've heard of in the past.
Yeah, very useful. We've got a couple of people waiting. Jerry, do you have any, I know you're active in this stuff, you've been doing work in transit in particular. Do you want to unmute yourself and make a comment? Or?
Well, I make one comment about the insurance pool that I've been working with. They consider the future of technology may change their future as well, and we're looking at this as an existential question for them as a pool. Now, it's entirely different, I think, from the situation that Mike Scrudato and Jaques, who are dealing with autos, face. But we're out there, you know, we're kind of breaking new ground. We do have support from the insurance folks. I think maybe in some ways we can be a model for some of this. We have engaged with federal regulators as much as we can, state regulators, and it's a fascinating time to be involved in this. And I think, you know, eventually we're gonna come up with something good. I will yield the floor.
Yeah, and Jerry Spears, you've been in the middle of all this. Jerry, do you want to jump in? Unmute yourself.
Jerry was
Alan. Hey, yeah.
Jerry Spears was the guy who got this all started out.
Yeah, I know. We remember well, right, Jerry?
Yeah,
Thank you, Jerry, for getting it all started.
Thanks, guys. I just want to echo what Dr. Lutin was saying, that insurance companies or insurance pools, need to partner with the regulators within their environment so the insurance framework is consistent from state to state. And if we have a hybrid and mixture of stuff in this country, it's just going to be hit and miss and lots of turbulence, and we won't be as successful unless there was more consistency in it. That seems to be an ongoing struggle here, is that we're not in sync amongst the various groups that are working on this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that gets back to an interesting topic people have talked about. What's the government role in all this?
Maybe adding a point on Jerry before, not the last Jerry, the Jerry before. I've dealt with buses as well, and trucks and things like that. And as an insurance carrier, we were quite reluctant to insure bus fleets, and especially when you have to deal with that in places like the south of Italy, for example, and areas with high risk. And one of the major issues we faced is what you've been mentioning in the beginning: the fact of being sued every time the vehicle has a crash, because people fall and because there is all kinds of things happening inside the bus. And we have found a trick which actually worked extremely well, was to put a camera inside the bus. So have a camera inside the bus that would record what happened. So you have to put a notice in before the bus saying these buses video recorded, blah, blah, blah. And when there is a claim, then you can see exactly what happened. And actually it really decreases the amount of, I would not call that fraud, but I would say opportunistic claim filing that some of the riders may do. And I'm sure you've tried it, or you heard about it, and that's one of the measures that you're implementing. But that's actually very efficient, works well.
Oh yes, Jaques. We get sued by people who have never been on a bus.
Yeah, exactly, even better.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that the industry did find is that the placement of cameras produced a significant drop in bogus claims, or even some legitimate claims, or showed exactly who was at fault, and whether it was the transit agency or not. I've looked at a lot of the footage from my former employer, New Jersey Transit, so well aware of that. Every transit bus you get on nowadays has probably about 12 cameras on it, both inside.
Well, there you go.
Digital recorders and all kinds of sophisticated.
Perfect. Let me turn to Mitch Erickson, who was very active on the chat side of this. So he got volunteered to actually ask some questions live. Do you have some comments or questions, Mitch?
Sure. Are you hearing me, Dick?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. First of all, Jerry Lutin, can you please send me the URL for where I can, for the lawyers for the bogus bus rider claims? Because I haven't been on a bus in 2 or 3 years either. If that's the criteria, I meet it.
That was way back in the 90s.
I missed that bus. I get it. Okay. My question is real simple, and I don't know enough to ask it coherently, but I remember seeing something, I think it was in Alan's weekly commentary, about Volvo taking on all of the risk with their electric vehicles. Somebody please fill out what actually Volvo is doing and then comment on it, please. Looks like Jaques has got it, nodding his head. You're muted.
I'm muted. I'm no longer muted. I'm nodding because, yes, of course, I heard about that. I think it was an announcement, just like what we were saying about Tesla before. So Volvo declared that they were so sure about the quality of their vehicles, the safety of their vehicle, that they promised nobody will ever die in one Volvo, and therefore they said they would cover any risk of that kind. So I think it was with all I would say balance and respect for everybody, but I think it was more of a provocation, something to just throw the topic and say, this is what we think. We are so sure that this is how we believe our vehicles can behave. Now, it may have translated into a product or into an offer, which I'm not aware of, to be honest. But I just remember that statement that was quite strong a few years ago.
Something like back when we were all younger, Sears sold Craftsman tools, and they had this lifetime warranty that if you broke it, you bring it in and they'd replace it, something like that.
That's it. I think that's the same kind of stuff, to be honest.
Okay. And Ellen, did you have anything else to add on? I know you've thought about this a lot. Have we missed any of your comments?
I think only the question of privacy. So if all this data that's being collected, undoubtedly there will be breaches, and so how does that fit in? Who's responsible for that? How do we have insurance for that would actually be effective?
Yeah,
that overlaps with all the data issue. If you have a lot of data, that means there's no privacy either.
At least from a European point of view, we have that GDPR regulation that kicked in a couple of years ago, and that puts the individual, what is called the data subject, in the driver's seat, if I may say. So the data subject is the ultimate person who makes decision on where the data goes and for which purpose, and is able she is able as a data subject to have all the data raised that control the flows of data to where and how, and so forth. And what is considered as personal data is classified as any data that can help tracking back the user. So assuming a car, for example, generates travel distance, I would say people would say, well, travel distance doesn't allow me to track one person back. But if if you have a doubt on that person, you know where he lives or where she lives, and you know that distance translates into a gym or the school or the work, then you're able to trace back his or her lifestyle and things like that, which is what we don't want to have with data protection. So it's quite critical. It's not very clear and easy to define what is personal and what is technical data. So the European regulation says that technical data is not so much protected as the personal data. But if you think well, actually most of the information that the car generates can be used to trace back the driver. So it is protected in that way in Europe.
I've tried to argue in the past and been very unsuccessful at basically having a hold harmless clause associated with data that might be collected about me, and that might be collect all the data you want, but you can't then use it to say, hey, 3 months ago you went through this red light and here's your ticket. In a sense, if you want to use it for public good and so on and whatever, great, but don't go back and hang me for it. But apparently never gotten very far with that argument, and whatever.
Well, it is part of the regulation. There is
it is part.
Yeah, it is part. There is a topic in Europe that is called CITS, for cooperative ITS, so intelligent transport systems. And within the CITS directive, there is what is called the V2X, V2V, the exchange of data between vehicles for safety purposes. And part of this information can be, of course, the speed at which you travel, the location, your identification, and so on and so forth. And obviously, Consumers Association have raised a hand, and they have expressed their concerns about, possible backfire that this data could generate. And it was inserted in the regulation that the data would never be used against the citizens to find them or whatever. But in case of criminal offense, really criminal, I think that the Court of Justice has the right to claim for the data and to see it.
Let me say that a Shark Tank can't be complete without Brad Templeton. And I've seen Brad making comments on the chat line. So Brad, do you want to have something you want to say directly or comment? I'm sure you do.
Well, when I've examined the questions of insurance, one of the big unanswered questions has been the various roles of the insurance company. Now, they no longer will be the ones that good at estimating risk. Normally, they have rooms of actuaries that estimate risks for human driving. And pooling risk is not something that companies like Google need. They have more capital than the insurance companies. So one of the remaining things that insurance companies do is they actually keep all of those car crashes out of court by settling them through insurance. So NHTSA estimates that the cost of accidents in the United States is $870 billion, but the insurance companies in the United States only pay out about $200 billion in claims. So somehow $600 billion of damage is not compensated for, and you can say that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on whether you're paying it or whether you're receiving it. But this is a big gap that seems to be caused by the insurance industry. So I'm curious as to how people see I see some cats have joined us. That's good. I'm curious as to how people see that role, and it's not even a role people identify, of the insurance industry. They keep cases out of courts. They reduce the amount of damages paid in some way. When fleets of robotic taxis are run by large companies like Google Waymo or General Motors or Apple or other large capital companies, which are deep-pocketed operators, how's it going to be different, and is that a possible role for insurance?
Well, also, Brad, within that, there's a lot of self-insurance that goes on, and there are deductibles that also go on. And just my own personal behavior with respect to some crashes that I thought that, were little fender benders that I might have caused. Last thing I'm going to do is report it to the insurance company. I'm going to pay that out of my own pocket, because otherwise my insurance is going to go up by who knows what. And damn it, it's cheaper for me to just, pay for the darn thing myself. So there's part of that. To make up the whole 600 is there is still a gap that you mentioned, but some of that gap is in self-insurance.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think of something else when you say self-insurance. I mean, I believe Waymo will self-insure their fleet of self-driving taxis because they don't need someone else to pool risks, and they have
probably
the
not.
to do so.
Probably not. Yeah.
So that takes away the role of the insurance company from things like that. But then I'm still puzzled by this $600 billion difference. It's no minor difference. It's huge.
Yeah, but I think in the NHTSA number, it includes the self-insurance that Waymo is going to pick up.
Correct. That's their estimate of all the harm caused by car accidents.
I mean, most of the trucking companies self-insure, and they then buy some reinsurance from Munich Re, anyway, that's part of it. How much, I don't know.
I'm sorry we had to lose two people who had some expertise, but Jaques, do you have some particular information?
Well, I have a thought which is linked to what you said. I mean, I'm not going to get into the reinsurance and self-insurance topic. I think Alain covered it already. But I think an interesting aspect that we should have in mind is in the case the OEM, for example, or the product designer provides you a product that he self-insures. In case there is a claim and in case there is an issue with the product itself because it's a bad design, what do you think the OEM would do? I mean, is he going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I did a bad design, so here is Mr. Customer, here is the compensation," or will he try to hide it, and will he try to actually minimize his responsibility in this whole process? And that is a big, I mean, that's an ethical question as well. And that's a question of, do you want to be the one who has, the one who bears the risk and the one who is creating the same risk? And that is something which is quite tricky. So I think that you still need to have third-party insurance, providing again for the challenging concept, for being able that, someone says, well, look, maybe your design is not so good. Maybe you failed here or you failed there. I think that's important.
Well, so there are two, of course, very big different things here. First of all, any car accident involving a self-driving car will be fully recorded in 3 dimensions in a way that no car accident has ever been recorded before. It'll take about 10 seconds to determine who was at fault under the vehicle code. In terms of the classic definition of fault. Now, product liability is a different story.
Not so fast, but Brad.
You disagree?
I don't agree with your first statement. I mean, it's not going to be so easy. In 10 seconds, you won't be able to apportion liability in case of an accident. I think it will require much more time than that. I mean, no, of course.
Well, not all liability.
Some of them, yes, but in many cases, the reason for the accident will be much more complex than that.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just talking about the geometry of the accident. There'll be no question as to the geometry of the accident. That will be, who was where, who failed to yield right of way. That one will be fairly obvious. The defect question, the product liability question, obviously is not answered by that data immediately.
Well, it should. I mean, the dynamics of the accident, I mean, the physical things of the accident, you will have, I mean, it will be very interesting to compare the recordings of two cars having had a crash to understand, which car had what behavior in that point in time, because that's going to be also an interesting debate, which car made the mistake, which system failed, in case both were autonomous, of course.
Now, Volvo, Waymo, Mercedes, and several other companies have all said that they will accept liability for any accident for which their vehicles are at fault.
Of course, they have to. They have no choice.
Of course.
What can they do?
Well, they could fight the liability in court.
Well, yeah, but then, it will be just, what we said with Michael before, it's going to be a subrogation game because you will have to find who's responsible for that. In most cases, the OEM itself is not going to be responsible and is going to push responsibility on whatever provider has created the supposed faulty part.
But here's the second part, which is, I think, very scary, especially to the providers, which is with human accidents, and this is what actuaries do, is they learn the patterns of how humans have accidents and they estimate risk from it. Robots, once they make a mistake, that mistake is immediately fixed by the team, well, very quickly, maybe not immediately, by the team. So robots never make the same mistake twice, the way that humans can make the same mistake thousands of times again and again, and we get to understand it very well. Unfortunately, with every self-driving car accident is going to have a different cause, almost every one. And that could mean that the litigation over them is vastly more expensive than the litigation over human accidents, which would make this perverse result that it's actually more expensive to have an accident in a self-driving vehicle than it is for a human to have it. Anyway.
All right, that's interesting. We're getting near the end of our extra half hour. I want to see if anyone had any closing comments they wanted to make. Jane, Jerry, Jaques, and then I'll let Alan go at the end.
Well, I think it's I mean, just to say, to build up on the first comment, the first question when opening that Mike did about the future of insurance companies. I think this is a very interesting time. It's not. I don't think insurance companies are endangered by the advent of these new technologies. I think it's the opposite. I think it's a very interesting situation because it forces us to reinvent our business. I mean, automotive insurance is a very old product. It has very old, I would say, experience and things. And this is completely a new game. So we have to think about how these things happen. There's a lot of interactions. There is regulations. There is drivers, of course. Car manufacturers are part of the debates. I think that is extremely interesting times. So I see all these very positively. That can be my closing remark.
Yeah, very good. Well, we don't actually have to end at half an hour, but we probably should. Alan, I'm curious if have you learned anything new from all this?
Oh, well, of course I learned the most. Of course, I thought the discussion was really good. I guess my view on the whole thing is that I've always considered this as being an enormous opportunity for the insurance industry. Because in fact, what I said before with crash mitigation, yes, we get safety, but unfortunately it's at the expense of more expensive crashes. And who has to pick up on that tab of that, whether it's whatever percentage of the whole tab, it's been the insurance industry. Whereas this technology is focused on crash avoidance. That's what it has to be focused on. It can't be focused on crash mitigation. It has, you know, if the system thinks that the vehicle should slow down, the system should kick in and slow down the vehicle. It should be keeping it from crashing, not just doing crash mitigation. It shouldn't be making the crash less severe. It should be making it zero. And with that focus, then that really, in some sense, saves the insurance industry. It allows them to lower their rates and keep more of that money and become more profitable. So while the top line might go down, the bottom line, there's no reason why the bottom line needs to go down in conjunction and remain strong to continue to improve the fact that what we want to do is not have this, but have this. And that's where I think it has the opportunity to lead. It has the reputation to lead and can actually lead the industry to make sure that we don't do this, but in fact, we just do that. And that's where everybody's better off. And that's where I've been on, you know, with respect to the insurance industry.
I don't know whether we should officially close this, or I'm happy to stay and talk, but I know other people may have a life.
Come on, this is the life. There is no other life than this.
It's getting late here.
Anyway.
Thank you for organizing this. It's been a real pleasure to participate and to learn from our experts.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jaques. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Jane.
Thanks to all.
Thanks, Michael, for coming on, who's been an absolute leader in this, in moving the industry, and Jaques also, and Jerry also on the transit side, and Jerry Spears most particularly on the transit side. So this is all good work.
And I want to note before we go that Brad Templeton has been trying to bring a more dynamic experience to these Zoominars, and it'll be interesting to hear from those who tried to plug in how it went and whether that should be a regular part of these discussions.
Yep. We didn't announce it to the crowd, so unfortunately only we had 5 people in it, so it wasn't super popular today.
Well, next time around we'll be doing more. So.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, I think that's something we need to work on, is make sure you get more interaction with the audience. And we did some of that, we did a fair amount of that today, but it's, when I look at what goes on the chat side and on the Q&A, it's very, very active. And it is like there's another 2 or 3 conversations going on at the same time as this. And we need to figure out a better way to take advantage of that, because that's,
and also to help those conversations among groups of people who might want to attend these Zoominars together and in some sense discuss among themselves what's going on and live during it. So there's a lot for us to explore here.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm up on the panel, I always want to see, is the audience laughing or crying or what are they doing? And
well, there's no doubt there was a lot of interest, and we want to remind the audience that the series of debates and discussions will continue in the coming weeks, and we welcome everyone's thoughts about topics and participants. You can find us at zoom-tank.com, also at smartdrivingcar.com. And the Automated Vehicles Symposium, once again, we'll remind you, is slated for the end of July. It'll be a virtual conference. Head to automatedvehiclessymposium.org. And we thank everybody for taking part in this. We had some great participation and a lot of people chatting online. We hope you stay healthy and safe.
And for those who like this stuff, we'll have a double session at AVS. We'll get twice as much.
Even for those who don't like it.
That's right. Yeah. Well, but the downside of this stuff, you can't always see who's walking out. You do it in person, you can see who walked out early, and keep their name in mind. So anyway, I enjoyed it. Jaques, I especially thank you, because
Thank you, Jaques.
A little later hour.
Thank you. Thanks to all.
Yeah.
Mitch, Brad, Jerry Spears, everybody else who joined in.
Yeah, that was terrific.
And also the people who make it. I mean,
Jeremiah and Ken.
And Ken, but they make it work.